I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Kurosawa. And this week, we're going to be looking at the film 1987, When the Day Comes, by South Korean director Jang Joon-hwan. He is your favorite director's favorite director. Ari Aster frequently puts his movie Save the Green Planet, which we're not covering today, but another great movie, on some of his top movies of the all-time. Yorgos Lanthimos is doing an American remake of that movie, Save the Green Planet. So you want to check out this episode to hear about another one of his other great movies that's not being remade as of right now, but also maybe to get a little bit of an understanding about this filmmaker so you seem maybe a little bit more hip when Yorgos Lanthimos' next movie with Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons, when you can kind of say, oh yeah, I've seen the original remake. An interesting filmmaker, a filmmaker who only has had 3 movies made so far, and one I wanted to discuss. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is pick a different great Asian movie from a different great Asian director to help us kind of understand the wide world of Asian cinema, that there is more than Akira Kurosawa or Bong Joon-ho or Hayao Miyazaki. Some of the directors, Asian directors that maybe you've seen, there's 100-year history with Asian cinema with so many great directors, which is why I'm highlighting a different one every single week. And the videos are structured so that the first part of the video, we discuss the filmmaker, what makes them interesting, their career, and then the second half, talk about the film itself and go into a deep dive about what makes this movie special and why I think you should check it out, and also why I think it's a good entry point for this filmmaker. Every one of my videos, the movie that I recommend is not a movie that is only great if you've seen 5 of their other movies. Oftentimes it's a good starting point for you to really understand the rest of their filmography. So it's just a weekly recommendation. You guys have been showing support for some of the more recent videos, which I do appreciate. So if you have any thoughts, if you've seen this movie, if you've seen a movie like Save the Green Planet, or maybe you've heard of it, please let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But jumping into the first part of this video, just the discussion of the filmmaker in particular. Really why I wanted to cover him in this series is because first of all, we haven't covered a South Korean director in a little bit, not since the second episode of this, second episode in this series, with Lee Chang-dong and his film Secret Sunshine. We had kind of a run there of Japanese filmmakers, and then a couple weeks ago decided to do a Chinese filmmaker, and then last week was the Chinese filmmaker. The week before that was a Filipino director. So we're trying to diversify our different types of directors. Once again, going back to the South Korean well, and Jang Joon-hwan is a little bit different than maybe a Park Chan-wook or Bong Joon-ho, in that he makes his really kind of bold, exciting movie at a similar time in 2003, and then doesn't make another movie until 2013, and then makes this movie in 2017, and then that's it. He's only made 3 movies. So I thought he was an interesting filmmaker to look at. I mentioned at the top of the show that Yorgos Lanthimos' next movie is a remake of one of his movies, starring Jesse Plemons and Emma Stone. So, he's obviously a big fan of the movie. I first heard about the movie Save the Green Planet and Jang Joon-hwan as a filmmaker through Ari Aster, as a matter of fact, because he put this movie on a lot of his kind of top 10 lists of all-time movies. He was really kind of celebrating this movie as a kind of a smaller movie, talks about it in interviews and whatnot. And I kind of wanted to learn more about this filmmaker and his career, and you learn a little bit. He's really made 3 movies. The first one, Save the Green Planet, which is this frenetic, fast-paced, stylistically interesting and visually interesting conspiratorial story about a man who thinks the CEO is connected to aliens, and it's kind of told through the eyes of this madman. His second film, Hawaii, is this straightforward gangster movie, and then his third movie, 1987, is this politically charged investigative journalist social drama. So all 3 films are kind of different, and that's what kind of drew me to him in a way, is that some of my favorite filmmakers really love him, but also because he's only made 3 films, he's still at the start of his career in an odd way, and he hasn't necessarily developed a distinct style. And really what I think he is person who's dedicated to the story and is always interested in telling his movie in service of the story. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with 1987 and why that's so different than something like Save the Green Planet. But every one of his stories that he's told, he's done so, I think, something like Save the Green Planet needs those kind of visualistic, kind of stylistic, interesting camera work and frenetic kind of pacing, because we're telling the story essentially through, in many instances, through the eyes of this crazed man. So it needs that kind of energy. In the same way 1987 needs to be a little bit more reserved because it's this true kind of social drama, but a true story. But let's jump into the film, because that's kind of one reason why I wanted to discuss him. Was I was really moved by this film. So the movie 1987, When the Day Comes, is about an uprising in Korea, a democratic kind of uprising in Korea, starting off with the point of these kind of anti-communist police/government division who kill a student protester, and how they try to cover that up. I mentioned it's a true story, and you can tell, I think, Joon-hwan is really moved by the story and wants to tell it the right way. And the way he does it is handsomely. And that's what I really want to explore on this episode. It's this idea of handsome filmmaking, or what that exactly means. You may have heard that or read that in other reviews. If something's handsomely made or technically proficient, it's sometimes actually a dismissive kind of a term, or something that is to be taken credit for and not necessarily always appreciated. But on this channel, I really want to do a deep dive on what that means, a kind of handsomely made movie. It doesn't mean that there's great, good-looking movie stars, or that the movie is visually interesting in a way. As a matter of fact, oftentimes it doesn't mean that. Oftentimes it means a strong technical craft, but lack of stylization, often towards dramatization, where the story takes centerfold, where the camera work is very realistic. The set, how people act, feels true to life. Oftentimes true life stories are kind of handsomely made. Movies like Spotlight. But then sometimes, stylistic filmmakers like David Fincher, you think of his movies, Seven, even something like The Social Network, have a certain kind of tilting of the camera and slow, kind of small movements of a very still camera, and serial killers and whatnot. There's stylistic attributes of a filmmaker like David Fincher. But he can make a movie like Curious Case of Benjamin Button. That's a movie that's handsomely made. Less interested in some of his stylistic visual flourishes, and more so interested in telling the story and the emotions of the story. Another filmmaker who continually makes kind of handsomely made movies will be Ron Howard. If you've seen a movie like Apollo 13, that almost feels like that movie doesn't have a director. There is no kind of stylistic flourishes. So I'm talking about stylistic flourishes like Wes Anderson. You see a frame of Wes Anderson's movies, perfectly symmetrical, you identify that. De Palma with split screens. Fincher maybe with serial killers. There are kind of visualistic kind of similarities that directors will employ. And film fans like myself, sometimes it's fun to see how a career evolves, but then also kind of pick up on those little things, because that's the way Wes Anderson makes a movie, that's the way David Fincher makes a movie. But oftentimes for these social dramas, what's interesting is what's the best way to tell the story oftentimes is to feel like there is no director, to just focus on the story, just make it as clear as possible. Have everything technically competent, thrilling sequences, well lit, great acting, but there is nothing kind of directing your attention to the almost artistry of it, and it's more so focused on a technical craft, a technical expertise. That's how I think of these movies. There is nothing kind of distracting us. So when a movie like Ron Howard's 13 Lives comes out, it gets maybe dismissed by critics, but great filmmakers like Paul Thomas Anderson and Steven Spielberg do Q&As for the movie, and they call it one of the best movies of the year. Even though maybe it's harder to analyze and kind of fit into a box visually, what it is ultimately is technically competent, but also in service of the story. And I think that's what 1987 is. And I think what's interesting about Jang Joon-hwan, if you see in all of his movies, he's almost closer to a Ron Howard than he is a Yorgos Lanthimos. It's not surprising that Lanthimos wants to make Save the Green Planet, remake it, because Lanthimos himself is a very stylistic filmmaker in the way his characters speak, in the way he shoots things. Poor Things, The Favorite, The Lobster, these are very kind of odd, off-kilter type movies. And even someone like Ari Aster kind of has a pretty distinct style. But if you watch a movie like 1987, it's hard to believe it's the same filmmaker that also made Save the Green Planet, because Save the Green Planet is bold and exciting, and it's clearly the work of a young filmmaker trying a bunch of different things out. But when you look at it in the context of his entire career, you realize, oh, that's not just what he does in every movie. It's because of the story he was telling was about this kind of crazed individual, so it was more of a frenetic kind of a movie. But when you're telling a movie about a true life social drama, that's going to have a much more reserved style of telling. I mentioned before, dramatization, not stylization. That's kind of the key difference here. Things are very realistic. The camera doesn't move all over the place and is really showy with one, long take oneers and things like that. It's there to tell the story because this is an important story to tell, and because clearly Joon-hwan is connected to the story and knows for the people that were involved, these are real people, that this was an emotional story for them. And he doesn't want to almost degrade the realism of the story and their true kind of sacrifice by putting the movie and putting his filter on the movie by making it about him. He doesn't want to make the movie about him. He wants to make the movie about the event. That's why I think of movies like Spotlight or the films of Ron Howard, like Apollo 13, or even if you want to use that Fincher example of Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Interested in the story, and that's what's fascinating about this movie, and that's why I wanted to explore with this movie in particular. And I think that connects kind of Joon-hwan as a filmmaker as a whole. So of course this movie has great technical craft, gliding type camera work, which is interesting, great sets, great kind of period piece production design, awesome acting across the board. What's also interesting is the storytelling and how secretly complex the storytelling is. It feels like a great TV show in that there's a lot of different characters, but there's never a character that you're introduced to that is irrelevant. Every single person is, even if they don't show up till later in the story, is relevant. Every person that you're seeing isn't there just to bring color to the world. They will have an important part of this story later on. And because this is such a wide-ranging story, you have the police and the prosecutors and this anti-communist kind of group of thugs, as the movie calls it, and then the student protesters, and then the kind of revolutionaries that are trying to do it on their own, kind of through political means. You have all these different types of parties within this entire story that he's very great at, Joon-hwan's great at telling us the different perspectives of different people by essentially jumping protagonists. This movie doesn't have a lead protagonist, and subtly, without you even realizing, kind of jump from different perspective to different perspective, starting out with a prosecutor, then going over to a student, female student, who eventually becomes kind of a female protester, and then like the story of the revolutionary and how that connects to the female protester. So there is this kind of connection and jumping of different protagonists of this movie, so it feels like a true ensemble piece, and also is expertly told in that without you realizing, we do jump between storylines in this interesting, subtle way that all those kind of connect and weave together, kind of using the anti-communist thugs as the through line throughout it, as the kind of big bad. Now, the movie clearly does have a viewpoint, and when you're talking about handsomely made movies, they're not unbiased. Oftentimes they're argued as being kind of overly sentimental, and that's the kind of a drawback of this movie. It really does have a really kind of almost treacly sentimental ending, but if you're emotionally connected to the story, then you don't really care about that. When you're watching a movie like Apollo 13, you're emotionally invested in these men's journey, and you become so emotionally invested in the movie that you feel great, and that's what's the best part about handsome filmmaking, is that it's technically proficient, yes, but it's also first and foremost focused on the story and telling the story, oftentimes these true events, in the best way possible. And 1987 is a rousing, moving social drama. So by the end of the movie, you really do feel the sense of kind of overcoming, even though you do realize that it is pretty kind of heavy-handed in that sense. Listen, nobody's perfect. But for a movie that is very handsomely made in the best way possible, so much so that it tells the story the best way possible, that's what 1987 is. It's a filmmaker in service of the story, and another prime example that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on this video or this movie if you've seen it, and stay tuned to next week, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, as all these videos come out for another episode of More Than Kurosawa, another great filmmaker, another great film. We've been having a lot of fun, or I've been having a lot of fun kind of with this series so far, so I hope you are enjoying it as well. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.